This was such a tragedy, and I have a really great guest to talk about what happened on Easter Sunday. On Easter, a group of Islamic suicide bombers in Sri Lanka mutilated 800 people, mostly Christians and Buddhists, by simultaneously walking and driving into 9 populated sites, including 3 churches and 3 hotels on Easter Sunday, murdering more than 300 of them. They would have senselessly ravaged more, but the 6-foot-long pipe they placed outside the airport in Colombo was found and defused. But I think since then there was another bombing. The government blocked access to social media immediately following the attacks, and joining us is author Craig Winn, who is the world expert on terrorism, to help us kind of answer the big questions looming of who would do such a thing and why. Let me give you a little background on my guest. After the events of September 11, Craig Winn began a research project with colleague Ken Power to uncover the roots of terrorism. They visited 120 countries and interviewed members of al-Qaeda, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Fatah, Al-As Martyrs Brigades, Force 17, the Palestinian Authority, the Knesset, IDF, and U.S. generals, as well as Israeli Secret Service agents in the Mossad and Shin Bet. The 2 published their findings in the novel Tea with Terrorists. But this is the really interesting about this gentleman. Prior to becoming an author, Winn was a businessman who became an early .com billionaire after founding the multi-billion-dollar dot company Value America, a predecessor of Amazon.com. Mr. Winn, welcome to the show. So nice to meet you.
Boy, just reading that bio, I'm exhausted.
Well,
I didn't write it, by the way, and I would never have said such flowery things about myself, but it is delightful to be here. The thing that Terry would give me the most credibility for what we're going to talk about, and the reason I can share with you and your audience the truth as opposed to my opinions, is that I devoted 5 years to being the first to reorder the Quran chronologically and to set it into the context of Muhammad's life using the 2 historical and biographical accounts of hadith that were written within a couple of hundred years of his death. So I used all Islamic sources to reorder the Quran chronologically and to set it into the context of Muhammad life. And that result is called Prophet of Doom. Not trying to sell it. It's available in its entirety for free at prophetofdoom.net. And in it, you will understand Islam. You'll understand exactly what happened and why it happened in Sri Lanka.
Well, this is the thing. I'm embarrassed. I don't know a lot about Sri Lanka. I mean, I'm a world traveler, but I don't know anything about this country. And you visited 120 countries and you talked to all these different people. And I guess after, making your fortune, early in the .com era, I mean, money wasn't an object, and you would be able to get the type of access to these groups that you needed. What stands out? What is the one common denominator of all of these people that you've met and had tea with and everything else? What is the common denominator?
Terrorism has a common denominator, Terry. It's Islam. It's not al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda doesn't even exist anymore. It's not the Islamic State. They've been bludgeoned almost into oblivion. The common denominator is Islam as it was lived by Muhammad and proclaimed in the Quran. That is the common denominator. Fundamentalist Muslims commit 95% of the world's terrorist acts. And so there's no getting around that common denominator. But there's another one. And having talked with world leaders and gotten to know them, the other common denominator is the denial of reality. So if you have a situation where you have a 95% correlation between one group and the world's acts in human history, and you deny it, and it's universally denied in the media and among politics, what would be the greatest concern? The fact that you have a doctrine that is perpetrating 95% of the world's terrorist acts, or that no one wants to deal with it, in fact, will deny it.
But when you have a billion very peaceful people that will study Islam, or that is their faith, the impact it has on these almost 1 billion people who don't ascribe to violence, they don't ascribe to what you see with the fundamentalist Islamics. This is a problem. Do you see it as a problem, or do these leaders see it as a problem?
The problem is the unawareness. I won't use ignorance because that's a pejorative.
Okay.
The unawareness of the vast preponderance of religion's adherents. It would be the same thing would be true with Christians. It would be the same thing would be true with Nazis. Even if you want to look at a doctrine of man, same thing is true with Muslims. The vast preponderance of those who ascribe to a certain faith are only of that faith either by compulsion or by their upbringing.
Okay.
Very few people. In fact, in Islam, if you choose not to be a Muslim in an Islamic country, you will be killed. So they ascribe to Islam by compulsion. That doesn't mean that they understand Islam. And the fact of the matter is, I've done the research to understand Muhammad and Islam better than anyone in the West, and probably better than any Islamic scholar.
So tell me,
the answer to your question is, those who are peaceful and call themselves Muslims, according to the Quran's definition, are bad Muslims. And those Muslims that are committing acts of jihad by Muhammad's example and the Quran's teaching are good Muslims.
Really?
Absolutely.
So let me ask you this, because I personally know so many Muslim people. The attacks that are coming from Christians on I'm just going to ask you on the Islamic faith, are they justified?
Well, no, most are not. Most people who attack others do so for reasons that actually expose their own ignorance. Like anyone that will attack someone or criticize someone based on their skin's color doesn't deserve for us to even listen to them.
Okay.
Someone who will criticize a religion based upon the acts of a few individuals ought not be listened to either.
Okay.
The only way that you can effectively, and there's probably only 5 people in the West with the courage and the compassion to do this, because to do so, you're going to get what I got, which is 1,000 death threats.
Yeah.
If you do what I did, which is to analyze the Quran by setting it into the context of Muhammad's life and reordering it chronologically using the 2 oldest hadith sources, which are reports from Muhammad and his companions, and you do that, and then you present Islam as it was lived by Muhammad, and you compose a 1,000-page book based exclusively on Muhammad's words and deeds, and you prove conclusively that Muhammad was a pedophile and a rapist and a terrorist and a thief and a liar and amongst the worst that humanity has ever produced, and you prove it using only the earliest Islamic sources, then you're in a position to do what I'm doing, which is to tell the truth about the nature of the religion that inspires 95% of the world's terrorist acts.
And so let me ask you this real quick about the government. Is the government complicit in what happened to these 800 people?
No. In fact, people pointing the finger at the government saying, you should have protected us. The only way that you can protect a population from individuals who will die to kill others, which is what a suicide bomber does for religious reasons, is to deprive the people of all of their liberty. And so the trade-off for protecting people so that they are not harmed by such individuals is to rob them of their liberty. The best thing to do has always been to tell the truth, for more people to take the time to study what it is that is the common denominator in terrorist attacks worldwide. As I say, 95% are perpetrated by fundamentalist Muslims. Other people ought to have done what I did. And if you don't want to do it, at least read the research that I provided. It's provided free. It's prophetofdoom.net, and it proves conclusively that Islam was written to be a terrorist manifesto, that Muhammad was a ruthless terrorist, in addition to being a sexist, a rapist, and a pedophile.
We're talking to Craig Winn, and he has traveled the world to 120 different countries, has interviewed members of just about every terrorist group on earth. He's written lots of books on terrorism, religion, government, that is available at Yahowah, YADAYAH.com. And I understand why you got so many death threats. When we find out, I'd like to know, are you in fear of your life? Craig Winn, who began a research project with his colleague Ken Power to uncover the roots of terrorism. I want to take a couple of calls, but I did want to ask you about the Assembly for the Oneness of God. We know a lot about ISIS, ISIL, Al-Qaeda, but what do we know about the Assembly for the
Formed
Oneness
about
of
15
God?
years ago. Their motto is the motto of Islam. There is only one God, Allah, and his messenger is Muhammad. Their primary objective in life is to preach true or traditional Islam. And they came to notoriety a few years back when they desecrated a bunch of Buddhist icons or temple fare, and that's when they came to light. They're headquartered out of India, but they're essentially a standard run-of-the-mill Islamic organization, and because they're fundamentalists, they're terrorists.
Sri Lanka is 70% Buddhist, 13% Hindi, 10% Muslim, and 1.5 million Roman Catholics. Less than 10 years ago, Sri Lanka's religious civil war ended after claiming 75,000 lives. This is incredible. Let's go to Emmanuel. Emmanuel, thank you for your call. Go right ahead.
Yeah, how y'all doing?
We're good.
One thing that, a Muslim won't do, and that's denigrate the name of any of God's prophets. I've never seen a Muslim do that.
Speak up. I can hardly hear you.
I said I've never seen a Muslim denigrate any of God's prophets, and that includes everybody from Noah.
All right, that's a bad call. I can't hear you. Let's go to Thurgood. Thurgood, go. Thank you for your call.
Yes, good morning.
The Quran,
the gentleman on.
Muhammad.
What is going on? Hold on a second, Mr. Winn, and hold on, Thurgood. It's kind of like we're getting some cross feed or something, right?
Hello?
Okay, go right ahead, Thurgood.
Yes, good morning, and good morning to your guests. Where do I begin? For every act this gentleman can point to in terms of terrorism by Muslims, I can speak to centuries of terrorism committed by the West since the age of Columbus. Well, what is the history of the world since the European left its shores in the 1400s, if not the enslavement, torture, and colonization of all the known world? Let's roll to modern times. We're now in, year 15 or so of the war based upon lies, no weapons of mass destruction, no nuclear weapons as a justification to invade Iraq. But we bombed those people, cruise missiles, smart bombs. The Red Cross in Europe estimated over 1 million people died as a result of our unjust war based upon lies for profit. I made this example the other day. Consider this. They're terrorists. Let's put the shoe on the other foot. After World War II, we decide to give the Jewish people Chicago and the state of Illinois as reparations for that which the Germans did to them, so killing 6 million people, how would that sit with you? Terrorism is, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. I want you to understand that, just the mere fact that you get in a plane and put a uniform on and napalm someone doesn't make you any less of a murderer than someone who does it with a pipe bomb and trying to pursue a certain political end. So Christianity allegedly, doesn't advocate outwardly violence. nor does Islam. Regardless, as Christians, we have not been exactly guided by our Christian faith in terms of our execution of foreign affairs and foreign policy.
All right, Thurgood, thank you. I've got to go because I don't have a lot of time. I'm sure, Mr. Winn, you've heard these type of arguments before. How do you respond to Thurgood's his thoughts?
How do I respond to what now?
To what Thurgood just said, what his thoughts were.
Oh, I've just said that to claim that the world was wrong in giving the Jews back their homeland is like giving Chicago to the Jews today is the most idiotic thing a person can say. It shows a complete ignorance of what that land's history had been and how that land has been occupied by Jews and that it was their homeland. And to compare it to giving up Chicago is just utter nonsense. That's the problem, though, of religious zealots. Mm-hmm. Rather than studying history, being aware of facts and using evidence and reason, they promote these absurd platitudes. Now, I will tell you that he's right in that, boy, when it comes to the United States' behavior in the Islamic world, we've been horrible. We never should have invaded Afghanistan. The primary reason I wrote my first book on Islam, because I knew George Bush and I knew what he was going to do, was because when I could not meet with him right after 9/11 and I wanted to dissuade him from invading Afghanistan and Iraq, and I knew he was going to do it. That's why I went and met with al-Qaeda. I wanted to be a voice of reason to say we never should have done that. It was a horrible decision. We made a bad situation worse in both places. So he's right in that regard, wrong in everything else.
All right, then. So, Chris Winn, Craig Winn, I know that you don't have a lot of time. I want to thank you for coming on today. Would you come back on with me again sometime?
You know, you and your program director are two of the nicest people I've talked to in a long time.
Oh,
I would love to.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Interesting conversation, interesting thoughts. You know, I know that many of you took a lot of offense to what Craig Winn said. And I didn't bring him on to do that. However, these kind of conversations need to be had because there are people that really have spent their lifetimes finding ways to bastardize this religion. And Christians do it all the time. They bastardize every religion. If you're not a Christian, then there's something wrong with you. I know many of you who went over to the Nation of Islam in the 60s, whose parents would stop talking to you because you were no longer Christian. And the one thing that I loved about the education that I got, Titus, at Elizabeth Seton, is that we studied every religion on earth. We had theology every year. And in your senior year, as you're able, because I was devastated when Mr. Putz told me that Jesus really didn't walk on water, that he gave see, it's a long story. I'm telling you. But, I can't wait to get him back on. Thank you guys for listening to this. I know it was kind of wild, but I'm glad that he was on.